The morning sun cast long shadows across the private aviation terminal at LAX as Dr. Maya Richardson pulled up in her Tesla Model I. She wasn't trying to make a statement. That's just who she was. Simple, focused, successful. Dressed in her favorite dark jeans, a comfortable gray sweater, and white sneakers, she looked more like someone heading to a casual weekend brunch than a powerful CEO about to board her own private jet. As she grabbed her small carry-on bag from the trunk, Maya couldn't help but smile. At 38, she'd achieved what many considered impossible. Starting as a brilliant neurosurgeon, she'd spotted a critical gap in medical technology and turned that insight into a revolutionary company. Her medical devices were now saving lives in hospitals across the country. The private jet wasn't about showing off. It was a practical solution for visiting hospitals and attending medical conferences on her own schedule. The cool morning air felt refreshing as she walked toward the terminal entrance. Her phone buzzed with messages from her team about the upcoming presentation in New York, but she took a moment to take in the scene. Several sleek private jets stood on the tarmac, their polished surfaces gleaming in the early light. Among them was her new Gulfstream G650, a marvel of engineering that had taken years of hard work to afford. Maya had chosen this particular morning for the maiden flight under her ownership because it felt right. It was exactly 10 years since she'd performed her first solo surgery, a day that had changed her life. Back then, she'd been nervous but determined. Today, she felt that same mix of excitement and purpose. As she approached the terminal's glass doors, Maya noticed the usual bustle of airport staff and crew members going about their morning routines. Some were checking flight plans. Others were loading luggage onto various aircraft. She'd done her homework, memorized her flight details, and had all her documentation ready on her phone, just as she'd always been prepared for every surgery, every business meeting, every step of her journey. What Maya didn't know was that this ordinary morning was about to become anything but ordinary. She straightened her sweater, adjusted her carry-on strap, and reached for the door handle. The next few minutes would test her character in ways she never expected, but they would also spark a change that the private aviation industry desperately needed. The automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh, welcoming her into the climate-controlled terminal. The interior was all polished marble and sleek furnishings, designed to cater to the world's elite travelers. Maya took a deep breath, taking in the familiar scent of coffee from the exclusive lounge area. She'd earned her place here, fair and square, though she was about to discover that not everyone would see it that way. Walking toward the check-in counter, Maya pulled up her flight details on her phone. Her pilot had already filed the flight plan, the weather was perfect, and New York was waiting. She had no way of knowing that her next few steps would set in motion a chain of events that would not only challenge her patience, but would eventually reshape protocols across the entire private aviation sector. Time to fly, she whispered to herself, a small ritual she'd kept from her residency days. But before she could reach the counter, she noticed 3 staff members exchanging glances and beginning to move in her direction. Their expressions suggested this wasn't going to be the smooth morning departure she had planned. 3 staff members approached Maya with the kind of expressions she'd seen too many times before. The first one, a ground crew member in his crisp blue uniform, stepped directly into her path. His name tag read Operations Supervisor, but his tone carried none of the professionalism his position demanded. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, emphasizing the last word in a way that made it sound less like courtesy and more like dismissal. "The commercial terminal is in the other direction. This is a private aviation facility." He gestured vaguely toward the main airport, not even trying to hide his impatience. Maya kept her voice steady, just as she did during challenging surgeries. "I understand where I am. I'm here for my flight to New York." She reached for her phone to show her documentation, but a second staff member, a flight attendant in a gray uniform, stepped forward with a tight smile. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," the flight attendant said, speaking slowly as if explaining something to a child. This area is for private jet owners and their approved guests only. We're quite familiar with all our regular clients. Her eyes flickered over Maya's casual outfit, making her judgment clear. The third staff member, another ground crew worker, crossed his arms and shifted his weight, creating a more imposing barrier. Look, we can call you a taxi if you need one, but you really can't be here. Maya took a deep breath, remembering all the times she'd faced similar assumptions during her medical career. I am exactly where I need to be, she said firmly. If you'll allow me to show you my documentation. Ma'am, the supervisor cut her off. We have procedures to follow. We can't just let anyone walk in claiming they own a private jet. He exchanged knowing looks with his colleagues, the kind of looks that spoke volumes about their assumptions. A few other travelers in the terminal had started to notice the confrontation. Some pretended not to watch, while others openly stared. Maya felt their eyes on her, but kept her focus on the staff members. I understand procedures, Maya said, her voice taking on the same tone she used when teaching medical students. That's why I have all my documentation ready. The Gulfstream G650 on the tarmac, tail number N789MR, is registered to my company. I'm Dr. Maya Richardson. The flight attendant's laugh was both soft and cutting. Right, and I'm the Queen of England. She turned to her colleagues. Should we call security? Maya noticed a young man rushing from the terminal building, carrying a leather portfolio. She recognized him as Kevin, her assistant, but before she could say anything, the supervisor stepped closer. Ma'am, this is your final warning. Either you leave voluntarily, or we'll have security escort you out. His voice had grown louder, drawing even more attention from others in the terminal. Maya stood her ground, her hand still holding her phone with the documentation pulled up. Years of performing complex surgeries under pressure had taught her the value of staying calm in tense situations. She could feel her heart racing, but kept her expression neutral. I suggest you take a moment to verify my identity before making any more assumptions, she said quietly. Because I can assure you, this situation is not going to end the way you think it will. The staff members exchanged glances again, but this time there was a flicker of uncertainty in their expressions. Something in Maya's calm confidence had created a crack in their certainty. And as Kevin approached with the physical documentation, that crack was about to break wide open. Maya calmly pulled up her phone's screen brightness and held it out, displaying the aircraft registration documents and her pilot's scheduled flight plan. Please, take a look at these documents. It will clear everything up. Her voice remained steady, though she couldn't help but notice how her hand holding the phone was starting to tremble slightly with contained frustration. The supervisor barely glanced at the screen before waving it away. Anyone can make fake documents on their phone these days. We deal with people trying to sneak in here all the time. He pulled out his radio, speaking into it with deliberate clarity. Security to main terminal, possible situation at entrance. A small crowd had gathered now, some pretending to check their phones while watching the scene unfold. Two pilots in their crisp uniforms stopped their conversation to observe. Maya noticed one of them frowning, perhaps starting to sense that something wasn't right about how this was being handled. I'm going to record this interaction, Maya announced, starting to video with her phone. For everyone's safety and accountability. She'd learned long ago that documentation was often the best protection against unfair treatment. The flight attendant's professional smile vanished completely. Recording is not allowed in this secure area. She stepped forward, trying to block Maya's phone camera view. This is a security violation. You're only making things worse for yourself. Kevin, Maya's assistant, was now frantically trying to get through the small crowd that had formed. He was carrying the leather portfolio containing all the physical documentation, waving it above his head. Dr. Richardson. I have the papers right here. But the staff members had formed a tight circle around Maya, effectively blocking Kevin from reaching her. The third ground crew member spoke into his own radio, possible security breach, multiple individuals involved. Maya took a deep breath, the same way she did before making a crucial incision in surgery. "I want to speak to your supervisor," she said firmly. "Not over radio, in person. Now." "Oh, you'll be speaking to someone, all right," the operations supervisor replied with a smirk. The sound of heavy footsteps announced the arrival of 2 security guards, their boots clicking against the terminal's polished floor. The crowd had grown larger. Mobile phones were out, recording the scene. Maya could hear whispers. "What's going on? Why are they treating her like this? Someone should do something." Just then, a sharp voice cut through the tension. "What exactly is happening at my terminal?" The crowd parted as an older man in an expensive suit walked briskly toward them. His badge identified him as the Director of Private Aviation Operations. The security guards had just reached Maya when Kevin finally managed to break through, practically stumbling forward with the portfolio. Sir," he called out to the director. "These are Dr. Richardson's ownership documents for the Gulfstream G650. She's the owner. I'm her executive assistant." The operations supervisor's face started to change as he watched the director take the portfolio and begin examining the papers. The color drained from his face as realization dawned. The flight attendant took a small step back, her earlier confidence evaporating. Maya stood tall, her phone still recording. Years of facing doubters in medical school, residency, and the business world had prepared her for moments like this. She wasn't angry. She was determined. Determined to make sure this became a teaching moment, not just another incident swept under the rug. The terminal had gone completely quiet. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. The morning sun streamed through the large windows, illuminating the scene like a spotlight on a stage. This was more than just a misunderstanding about a private jet. It was about to become a moment of reckoning for everyone involved. The Director of Private Aviation Operations flipped through the documents in the portfolio, his expression growing more serious with each page. He looked up at Maya, then at his staff, then back at the papers. "These documents are completely in order," he said, his voice cutting through the tense silence. "This is indeed Dr. Richardson's aircraft." The color drained from the operations supervisor's face. The flight attendant's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The security guards, who had been ready to escort Maya out moments ago, now looked uncertainly at each other. "Dr. Richardson," the director said, straightening his tie, "I cannot begin to express how deeply sorry I am for this situation." His voice carried genuine concern and embarrassment. "This is absolutely unacceptable." Maya nodded slowly, still recording on her phone. "Thank you for acknowledging that. Though I have to wonder how many others have faced similar treatment without having their documentation immediately available." The crowd that had gathered was now completely silent, many still recording on their phones. Some were shaking their heads in disbelief. Others looked embarrassed to have witnessed such blatant prejudice. Kevin, Maya's assistant, finally caught his breath and started organizing the scattered papers that had fallen from his portfolio during his rush. "Dr. Richardson has owned this aircraft for 3 weeks," he explained, his voice slightly shaky. "All the paperwork was filed properly. I sent copies to your office myself." The director turned to his staff, his face reddening with anger. "We received those documents. They were in our system. Did any of you bother to check before creating this scene?" The operations supervisor stammered, "Sir, we just thought. I mean, it seemed unlikely." "Unlikely?" Maya's voice was calm but firm. "Unlikely that someone who looks like me could own a private jet? Is that what you're trying to say?" She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "I'm a neurosurgeon who built a medical technology company from the ground up. My devices are used in hospitals across the country. But you didn't bother to check any of that, did you?" A woman in the crowd spoke up. "That's disgraceful." Others nodded in agreement, some muttering similar sentiments. The flight attendant stepped forward, her face flushed with shame. Dr. Richardson, there's no excuse for how we treated you. The director raised his hand for quiet. Dr. Richardson, would you come to my office? I want to address this situation properly. He turned to the staff members involved. All of you, report to HR immediately. This isn't over. Maya checked her watch. Her meeting in New York was important, but this moment was crucial too. She had the chance to turn this humiliating experience into something meaningful, something that might prevent others from facing the same treatment. Actually, she said, putting her phone away at last, I think we should have this conversation right here, where it happened. I want every employee in this terminal to hear what I have to say. She looked around at the gathered crowd, making eye contact with various onlookers. Because this isn't just about me. It's about changing the way things are done here. The morning sun had risen higher now, streaming through the terminal's windows and illuminating the scene like a spotlight on truth. The security guards stepped back respectfully, the staff members looked at their shoes, and the crowd waited in anticipation. This wasn't just going to be an apology. It was going to be a moment of real change in the private aviation industry. The private terminal's VIP lounge had quickly been cleared for an impromptu meeting. Maya sat at the head of the long table, her casual sweater and jeans a stark contrast to the suits surrounding her. The director had called in his entire management team, and they all watched intently as she spoke. What happened today isn't just about me being denied access to my own jet. Maya began, her hands folded calmly on the table. It's about a bigger problem that needs to be addressed. Her voice was steady, the same voice she used when teaching young doctors about difficult procedures. The director nodded, dabbing his forehead with a handkerchief. Dr. Richardson, I want you to know that those employees will face immediate consequences. Maya held up her hand. Firing them isn't the solution, she interrupted. That would just hide the problem. What we need is real change. She pulled out her phone and showed them the video she'd recorded. Watch how quickly assumptions were made, how easily professionalism was forgotten. The management team shifted uncomfortably in their seats as they watched the footage. One woman, the head of customer service, covered her mouth in shock. This is not what we train our staff to do, she whispered. But it is what happened, Maya replied. And I guarantee I'm not the first person who's experienced this. I'm just the first one who owned the plane. She paused, letting that sink in. Kevin, still standing by the door, nodded in agreement. Outside the lounge, the regular bustle of the terminal had resumed, but things felt different. The staff members involved sat in the HR office, their faces pale as they wrote their incident reports. Other employees whispered among themselves, the story already spreading through the terminal like wildfire. Here's what I propose, Maya continued, pulling out her tablet. I run a company that develops medical technology, but before that, still am, a neurosurgeon. In surgery, we have protocols, checklists, and procedures that must be followed every time, no matter what we think we know about the patient. The director leaned forward, his expression intense. What exactly are you suggesting? A complete overhaul of your customer verification process, Maya said, opening a notes app. One that removes the possibility of personal bias. Every client, every guest, gets the same treatment, follows the same protocol. No exceptions, no assumptions. The head of operations raised his hand. But we know most of our regular clients. And that's exactly the problem, Maya cut in. You think you know what a private jet owner looks like. Today proved you don't. She started typing on her tablet. I'm going to be late for my meeting in New York, but I'm willing to invest my time in fixing this. Not just here, but industry-wide. The room fell silent as the weight of her words sank in. Through the lounge's glass walls, they could see passengers walking past, some still filming on their phones. The story was probably already hitting social media. My assistant Kevin will reschedule my meetings in New York. Maya continued, her fingers moving quickly across the tablet's screen. Right now, this is more important. We're going to draft a new protocol, right here, right now. One that ensures this never happens to anyone else. The director straightened in his chair, finally understanding that this wasn't just about damage control, it was about real transformation. Whatever resources you need, Dr. Richardson. Maya looked around the table, making eye contact with each person. I don't want apologies, she said firmly. I want action. I want change. And it starts right here, today, in this room. The sun had risen fully now, streaming through the terminal's windows, highlighting dust motes in the air like tiny stars. It felt like a new dawn, not just for this private aviation terminal, but for an entire industry that desperately needed to change. By late afternoon, the private aviation company's response was swift and decisive. The company's CEO had flown in from their headquarters after seeing the morning's video spreading across social media. He sat across from Maya in the same VIP lounge, his face showing genuine concern rather than just corporate damage control. The 3 staff members have been placed on immediate administrative leave, he explained, sliding a folder across the table. But you're right. Firing them isn't enough. We need to fix the system that allowed this to happen. Maya opened the folder, reviewing the company's initial action plan. The CEO had already called an emergency board meeting, and their response went far beyond what she'd expected. You're proposing a complete overhaul of your training programs, she asked, impressed by the thoroughness. Yes, he nodded, pointing to specific sections in the document. And we want your input on all of it. Your medical background, the way you handle protocols and checklists in surgery. We could learn a lot from that approach. Through the lounge windows, they could see the busy terminal. Word had spread, and the atmosphere had shifted noticeably. Staff members were being extra careful with every guest, double-checking documentation regardless of appearance. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Kevin entered with Maya's laptop, setting up a video call with her medical technology company's board. They'd been waiting to hear from her at the New York meetings, but instead, she had a different proposal for them. We need to talk about creating a new training program, Maya told her board members on the screen. Not just for medical procedures, but for addressing biased and professional settings. We already have the framework from our hospital training modules. The aviation CEO listened intently as Maya explained her vision. His eyes widened when she described how her company's simulation technology could be adapted for sensitivity training. You're talking about using medical training technology for this. Exactly, Maya replied, pulling up some examples on her laptop. We've been using virtual simulations to train surgeons. We can modify that technology to create realistic scenarios for customer service training. People learn better when they can practice difficult situations in a safe environment. Outside, the 3 staff members from the morning incident sat in a separate room with HR, looking shell-shocked. They'd watched the videos of their behavior, seen the social media response, and were beginning to understand the gravity of their actions. But instead of being fired, they were about to become part of the solution. I want them involved in developing the new protocols, Maya said, surprising everyone in the room. They've learned a hard lesson today. Their experience can help prevent others from making the same mistakes. The CEO nodded slowly, beginning to understand her approach. You're not just trying to punish people for their biases. You're trying to help them overcome them. Punishment doesn't create change, Maya said, thinking back to her days teaching medical residents. Education does. Understanding does. And most importantly, having clear protocols that everyone must follow, regardless of their personal assumptions. As the sun began to set outside the terminal windows, casting long shadows across the tarmac, Maya's Gulfstream still sat waiting for its delayed departure to New York. But something more important was taking off. A new approach to training and awareness that would soon spread throughout the private aviation industry. The CEO stood up, extending his hand to Maya. Dr. Richardson, would you consider joining our board as an advisor? We need your perspective to make these changes work. Maya looked at the document in front of her, then at the terminal beyond the windows where regular operations continued. Yes, she said firmly, but only if we make these changes real. Not just here, but everywhere. The video of Maya's experience went viral overnight. By morning, it had millions of views across social media platforms. People weren't just sharing the video. They were sharing their own similar stories. The comment sections filled with experiences from successful professionals who'd faced the same prejudices in various industries. I never planned to become the face of this issue, Maya said, looking at her phone during a quick coffee break between meetings. The replies and messages kept pouring in. A famous basketball player had shared his own story of being questioned when trying to board his private jet. A well-known tech CEO described being mistaken for the cleaning staff at her own company. Kevin, still managing the flood of media requests, looked up from his laptop. The morning shows all want interviews. They're calling you a catalyst for change in the private aviation industry. Maya took a sip of her coffee, remembering the events of the previous day. The 3 staff members who'd confronted her had sent heartfelt apology emails. But more importantly, they'd each asked to be part of the solution, offering to share their stories in the new training program. Look at this, Kevin said, turning his laptop screen toward Maya. The private aviation company's competitors were releasing statements about reviewing their own policies. Nobody wanted to be the next viral video. They're all scrambling to show they're different. Maya pulled up the draft of her social media response on her tablet. She'd been working on it all morning, wanting to get the tone just right. This isn't about shaming anyone, she said, reading over her words. It's about fixing a system that affects too many people. Her phone buzzed with another notification. A major business magazine wanted to do a cover story, not about the incident, but about her journey from neurosurgeon to medical technology innovator. They wanted to focus on how she was now using that expertise to solve social issues. You know what's really interesting? Maya said, looking out the office window at the city skyline. Yesterday, those staff members couldn't imagine I owned a private jet. Today, thousands of people are learning about the medical devices we create, the lives we're saving in hospitals across the country. The company's PR team had prepared a press release, but Maya insisted on keeping it simple and honest. No corporate speak, no fancy words, just a straightforward commitment to doing better. In the afternoon, she received an unexpected email. A group of minority-owned businesses wanted to create a coalition to address similar issues across different industries. They saw how Maya had handled the situation, with dignity and a focus on solutions rather than punishment, and wanted to follow her example. We're getting support from unexpected places, Kevin noted, showing Maya another email. Other medical technology companies, normally their competitors, were reaching out to collaborate on the training program. They saw the potential to use simulation technology for more than just medical training. Maya stood up, walking to the whiteboard where she'd been mapping out the new training protocols. You know what the best part is? She said, picking up a marker. Those 3 staff members from yesterday, they're not hiding in shame. They're actively helping us identify where the old system failed. The afternoon sun streamed through the office windows as Maya added more notes to the board. Her phone kept buzzing with notifications, but she stayed focused on the task at hand. This wasn't just about one incident anymore. It had become something bigger, a movement for change that started with a simple morning at an airport terminal. People keep calling this a scandal, Maya said, stepping back to look at her notes. But I think it's an opportunity to show that real change doesn't come from pointing fingers. It comes from working together to fix broken systems. 3 months had passed since that morning at the private aviation terminal. Maya stood in front of a packed conference room at the National Aviation Industry Summit, looking out at faces from every major private aviation company in the country. The room buzzed with energy as she prepared to present the results of their new training program. In just 90 days, Maya began, clicking to the first slide, We've trained over 2,000 staff members across 15 different private aviation terminals. She smiled, remembering how it all started. And guess who helped design our most effective training scenarios? The very same staff members who stopped me from boarding my own plane. The audience leaned forward as she showed video clips from the new virtual reality training modules. They watched as staff members practiced handling difficult situations, learning to follow protocols rather than assumptions. The simulation technology, adapted from her medical training programs, had proven even more successful than expected. But the numbers tell the real story. Maya continued, switching to a graph. Customer complaints about discrimination have dropped by 78% at participating terminals. Staff satisfaction has increased by 65%. Turns out, people are happier when they have clear guidelines to follow. In the front row, she spotted familiar faces. The 3 staff members from that morning sat there, now serving as program trainers. They transformed their mistake into a mission, traveling to different terminals to share their experience and teach others. The best part. Maya clicked to the next slide, showing social media responses. People are sharing positive experiences now. Last week, a young entrepreneur posted about how smoothly she was processed at one of our train terminals. She wrote, "They didn't see my age, my gender, or my background. They just saw my documentation." Kevin, still by her side as her trusted assistant, managed the presentation technology while keeping an eye on his tablet. More success stories were coming in daily. Other industries had started reaching out, wanting to adapt the program for their own needs. But we're not done, Maya said, her voice firm. This is just the beginning. Next month, we're expanding the program to commercial aviation. After that, we're moving into hotel management, luxury retail, and financial services. Because this isn't just about private jets. It's about changing how we treat each other everywhere. She paused, taking in the room full of aviation executives. Remember, I'm still a doctor at heart. In medicine, we have a saying, prevention is better than cure. These protocols don't just prevent discrimination. They promote respect. The presentation screen showed a photo of the original terminal where it all began. It looked the same, but everything about how it operated had changed. Every guest now went through the same verification process, whether they were a first-time flyer or a regular client. 3 months ago, I was stopped from boarding my own plane. Maya said, her voice carrying across the silent room. Today, I'm stopping something far more important. The assumption that we can judge someone's success, wealth, or capability by how they look. The audience rose in a standing ovation, but Maya wasn't finished. She clicked to her final slide, showing future plans for expanding the program globally. This isn't just a training program anymore, she said over the applause. It's a movement. And it started because a few people were willing to learn from their mistakes instead of hiding from them. As the applause continued, Maya looked out at the faces in the crowd, people from different backgrounds, all nodding in agreement. The morning sun streamed through the conference room windows, just like it had that day at the terminal. But this time, it wasn't highlighting a problem. It was illuminating a solution.